Welcome to this Conveyancing Matters chat when Stu and I are going to discuss, has the Land Registry lost its way? Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property. So, hello Stu, how on earth are you?
I'm very good, Lorraine. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, lovely. So since we last did a Conveyancing Matters chat, quite a lot has hit the fan relating to the Land Reg. Quite a lot had been hitting the fan for a while with the Land Reg, but I think we both thought it might be a good idea to discuss as one of our first 2023 forays, Stu, has the Land Registry lost its way? What a good place to start. What do you think?
Well, we've discussed the Land Registry, I think, on some of our news videos, haven't we? A few times, more than a few times maybe now that they've come up. And I probably wouldn't be too far out saying it's now becoming sort of one of the main issues, I think, affecting sort of firms that carry out conveyancing. It's probably, well up on the agenda now in terms of problems, risk, and ultimately leading to complaints that we receive from clients because ultimately we can't get our bloody, transactions registered.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a really actually quite important point to be made from the get-go, because I think most conveyancers would generally say that the people at the coalface in the Land Reg, actually, to be fair, are probably in many ways quite similar in position to many people at the coalface in conveyancing. And I think that many of them are working under huge pressure, possibly still at home, which raises a different issue. But they are as good and helpful as their kind of work pressures will enable them to be. But they are under pressure to meet their KPIs. They always have been as an organisation, Stu. But of course, the delays with registrations are a classic example. Data that the Land Reg publishes itself, and registration times are going backwards, aren't they?
Well, yeah. You would have thought, wouldn't you? We were sort of a good year plus out of the COVID period and the stamp duty holiday fiasco. So you would have hoped, wouldn't you, that times are coming down, but statistically it doesn't seem to be the case. And also, I think one of the main points is you've got no idea how long a transaction is going to take to get through because it's so inconsistent.
Yeah, I mean, the Land Registry's own registration times that they are posting, and under the sort of what they've got an average and then an almost all figures, Stu. And I know I've quoted these before, but they do update them regularly. So a new build plot purchase will be 388 days. That's the almost all figure. A registration of part that's not on a new build extraordinarily is 448 days. And that's long enough to have probably 2 children, isn't it? And a first registration 307 days. Well, I know we've talked about this before, Stu, but firms like you, all firms are at the sharp end. I mean, this idea that you're going to get requisitions from the Land Registry some 12 months after you've submitted the application. I mean, talk to me about the impact that has on the post-completion team and the work generally.
It's wide-reaching. It's not just the post-completion team. Obviously, having files knocking around, whether they're hard, electronic, whatever you want to call it these days, having something a matter for that long, that period of time, is ludicrous, and the resource that sucks is incredible. And more to the point, a case handler, a fee earner that's dealt with that client is now under an obligation to continually revert to them over that period of time, and it's really difficult, isn't it? We kind of, I think when the Land Registry first sort of published these delays, took a stance that we weren't really updating clients, but now it's got to a point where all of these matters that we've completed, we're having to diarise to continually go back to the client to say that we're chasing the Land Registry, and as soon as we hear anything, we'll let you know, keeping them in the loop and keeping them updated. Because of course the problem is these are the published days, for want of a word, in terms of average conclusion times, but they're so different from case to case. And it seems to depend who you get at the Land Registry as to how long things are going to take. So it's really difficult. And of course, with the mortgage market at the moment the way it is, people sort of looking to refinance potentially, you're running into that ground, aren't you? And that's what's really, really, really difficult. And of course, the clients at the end of the day are the ones that ultimately could suffer a loss.
Have you amended your client care letter or your retainer to include, to try and manage your clients' expectations at the beginning about this?
Yeah, that was done some time ago, but I think it's really difficult for a client to comprehend that it will take that long. And I suppose, we make a big point of telling the client what's going to happen, i.e. the next, it's not over now you've completed. It's not an automatic given that, the title gets updated. There is a process that's about to now happen that will take some time. But, when you tell somebody it's going to take a year plus, it's very difficult to comprehend. And I know from personal experience, a number of clients that have rang the Land Registry, perhaps
that's
the
interesting.
Land Registry aren't maybe divulging the exact figures that they publish, which again makes it really difficult. But I would say now that the most common cause of complaint that we receive is actually that a client's title has not been updated.
And that's ridiculous. And what makes me really mad about that, and I, spoiler alert, I think in many ways the Land Registry has lost its way. Let's get that out there. But I mean, certainly when you and I first qualified, Stu, that was just never. It was never an issue. It was never something we had to consider. But what really I'll come back to that, I think. But what makes me very mad is that this very significant issue with the Land Registry turnaround times now, it impacts on us in terms of all the points you've just made, but it just adds to that general perception that it's the conveyancers and the conveyancing process that's the delay, which actually it isn't at all. We have to submit our applications within our priority period, otherwise we might be negligent. That's still a big cause of negligence claims against conveyancers. That's a given. But all of that is post-completion, post-completion, and is absolutely nothing to do with us. And yet it just becomes part of the narrative about, crap conveyancers, crap conveyancing times, crap conveyancing process.
Well, I don't want to sit here and slag off the Land Registry. Quite the opposite. However, there is a bit of a compromise in some way. We've had it bad, haven't we, as conveyancers for so long?
Yeah.
We've taken the brunt of everything that's been thrown at us, which, hasn't been our choice. None of what's happened over the last few years now as an industry have we voted on or anything like that.
Yeah.
And we're the ones that continually get it in the neck. So, when you talk about transaction times and things like that, it's really important that we measure from relevant points. But I think the overall issue is it's just so difficult to comprehend why it takes that amount of time, especially when the Land Registry are purported to scale up in terms of staff, training, all the sort of courses and seminars that we go on when the Land Registry are there. They do give a generalized talk about what they're doing. But it doesn't really seem to have changed since this time last year.
No, I don't. For outsiders looking in, and if anybody from the Land Registry wants to come and chat to us, I would be genuinely delighted to have them on. I mean, and I've was invited to be on a Land Registry forum, where they clearly are trying, engaging with practitioners. So I'm not, I agree with you in that sense, Stu. They are clearly making, significant efforts, and a very, very good thing for conveyancing practitioners that they do have now an absolute wealth of training resource for practitioners, whether it's checklists, flowcharts, webinars, the how-tos on the Land Registry website. I mean, there's an enormous amount of fantastic resource, and you can't get away from that, which practitioners should be looking at to try to decrease requisition rates and so on. But what I find interesting, because I've been involved with the Land Registry actually on and off for a very long time, and of course what they did was shed a very significant number of staff. I don't know the percentage, so I'm not going to misquote it. Sort of around the 2007-8 downturn, they closed a number of offices. And clearly, it was systemically that was going to have an impact. And of course, but you and I were at the same conference probably 3 or 4 years ago, Stu, when somebody at the top of the land registry stood up and said, yes, we understand the problems, we're recruiting. Well, even with the pandemic, clearly that recruitment isn't being seen. The fruits of those efforts clearly aren't being seen at the coalface for the likes of you, are they?
Yeah, well, it's all very well recruiting, but these people have to be trained. And I suppose, if you're going to recruit from the land registry, or from the land registry's point of view, you're not going to be able to get in somebody that's got experience that can slot in and do that job straight away, are you?
Well,
so I think
let me
it's more of a training sort of issue, I think, as well as recruitment.
Well, it is, and hey, Stu, let me talk over you, as somebody kindly pointed out not long ago, which is very funny. But of course, because I've been around for such a long time, the land registry recognised back in the late 90s that they had a very significant strata of very experienced registration executives who had years worth of land registration knowledge, who were all about to retire. So what they did strategically was introduce the land registry qualification, which, as the name implies, was a bespoke qualification for land registry staff, and it was at 2 levels, certificate and diploma. And I know a lot about it, and it sounds very pompous and arrogant, but I worked with the land registry to put it together when I was at one organisation, and then when I moved organisations and it went out to tender after the first 3 years, I'd moved, and the land registry moved the whole LRQ, as we called it, to the organisation that I worked for, and that was great. And you've hit the nail on the head there, Stu, because land registration is a combination of land law, it is a combination of conveyancing, but of course you have that technical land registration stuff, and there was of course no training product out there that particularly covered that very bespoke bit, and the LRQ therefore sought to bring all of those things together. And I think internally within the land registry it was well received, but the whole point about it was the purpose of it was to skill up those newer members of staff at the time, we're talking 20 years ago now, give or take, to deal with, funnily enough, the very issues that the land registry seems to be facing now. And I thought what was a great shame, and I'd moved on, so there was there was never any sort of personal benefit to me other than having been involved and set it up, but the land registry binned it eventually because they sort of perceived that it was too expensive. Well, maybe, just maybe, that was a cost benefit analysis that perhaps wasn't done as well, and I'm sure they do loads of internal training, but that was something that was there, it was already up and running, and it's I'm sure there were lots of internal strategic reasons for not continuing to run it, Stu, but the training is consistently, commentators are pointing out, well, what do the internal land registry staff, what are they doing and what are they up to? I know they're doing apprenticeships, and that's also fantastic. But
I'm sure
isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is. And I'm sure it's very, 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 very difficult to recruit and very, very difficult to train, in their kind of circumstances. I'm not sure, whether anybody sort of sits there and as a career kind of choice thinks, oh, I really want to go and work at the land registry. So I'm not sure that, it's an easy one for them. But there is always a line, isn't there? And like I said earlier, we don't want to slag off the land registry, but there is a line. And when the land registry then come out in a publication, actually start to blame conveyancers, as always seems to be the case, we're always whatever you want to call it, a beating stick, aren't we? That's when the line unfortunately has been drawn, and we have to address it. And to come out and sort of blame us, for want of a word, in terms of the requisitions we're receiving, I think it's a bit of a cheap shot, personally.
Yeah, I do. And I mean, let's get it out there. It was a land registry blog that came out on the 5th of Jan, by the Deputy Chief Exec of the Land Reg. So it's someone very senior, who actually, to be fair, is a very, decent man who's very erudite and goes to lots of events and speaks very well. But, when his first opening salvos in his blog are, one of the main obstacles we face is the avoidable errors in applications, and we frequently need to go back to applicants to seek to correct easily avoidable mistakes. We spend a lot of time checking for basic administrative errors. Now, that, to be fair to him, might be true, But I just think it was completely the wrong tone. And frankly, there was quite a big backlash against the Land Reg for that. And it was some way down that blog and that article before there was the line, well, we make mistakes too. And that was a bit too late, because I think the damage had been done. So I think that was perhaps as much about presentation as anything else. But I don't know whether you saw, Stu, but that obviously was reported in the Gazette, Law Society's Gazette. And there were 29 comments on that article alone, which is quite a lot for the Gazette. And we've talked about sort of inconsistencies and requisitions, Stu, and Anonymous in the Gazette pointed out a number of requisitions, but two of my favourites are a requisition came back, and I bet you've seen this. The fee quoted is incorrect. And of course, the response to the requisition was, well, no, it was correct when we made the application 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And another one, the ID1 has expired. No. Yeah. It was valid when we sent the application 18 months ago. So there is something going wrong. Whichever way you look at it, there is something going wrong. Now, did we read, Stu, that the Land Reg were, we did read, they were going to be sort of trialling a sort of pick up the phone and try and sort out simple requisitions by the phone thing. Have you come across that at all? Has anybody ever done that with you?
No, not personally. We've not seen it here.
No, and you'll remember, Stu, that years ago you could just pick up the phone, speak to a land registrar, deal with a technical issue, get your registration sorted, and that was phenomenal, wasn't it?
I mean, the land registry is it's an institution, isn't it? It's a phenomenal entity that has made buying UK property so attractive. Some of the things the land registry done have been unbelievable over the years, and we mustn't forget that. But I think, if you want to tie the whole conversation together, and we spoke a lot about training, the people at the land registry, not all, but some of the people that we do at the land registry clearly aren't as maybe educated, perhaps, as their predecessors. And maybe there isn't the ability to act in the same way that they did previously, which is probably similar to conveyancing firms in a way as well.
Yeah. I was just going to say that actually. You're absolutely right.
I'm not completely knocking everybody and not, looking our own sort of industry in the face. I think there's probably, some, a lot of, similarities in terms of volumes of work and maybe skill sets. We did a chat before, haven't we? I think last year, skill sets within the industry and are they reducing? And you could say maybe it's the same at the land registry.
Well, I think what's interesting though, and what I find odd about the timing of this incendiary blog about conveyancers are the cause of obstacles, is the fact that from last November all law firms had to submit their registrations, the bulk of the registrations, using the digital application process, which by the land registry's own admission was supposed to sort of cut down requisitions by something like 25%. So and surely that must be seeing results pretty much instantly, because you can't move from one field to the next until you've got this one right. So all of these sort of basic admin misspelling and all the rest of it, all the things that you and I really rather take for granted and think shouldn't be going wrong anyway, that shouldn't be so much of an issue anyway. So for this to come out sort of less than 2 months after the digitization requirement just seemed a real mismatch to me.
It's a strange time for the article to be released, especially when the land registry might also be going on strike. Is there a link there?
Well, a very, very good point. I mean,
all of a sudden we've got all these problems, and the land registry are not going to be there. So it's certainly not going to help us, is it? Not going to help them, not going to help us. I'm not sort of, getting away from the fact that maybe the reasons for going on strike are valid. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. I don't know. But whatever way we want to cook it, it's certainly not going to help us going forward, is it?
No, and I think because the practical point for conveyancers who haven't cottoned on to the fact that a strike is threatened, Google land registry strike, check the date or dates. I think the 1st of Feb has been suggested. Check it, because clearly firms need to be looking at the basics of of their priority periods expiring on that day and so on and so forth. Yep. Supposed to only be a day, might be averted, no idea. Like you, Stu, You know, I make no comment or judgment on people's right to strike and the reasons for doing it. But I think it's a very sad state of affairs when an institution of the size and nature of the Land Reg, that the staff, and it goes back to the staff, doesn't it, that they feel sufficiently undervalued, that they feel the need to do that. I mean, that in itself is quite telling. And I think it's an interesting point that you make about the timing of this particular salvo about firms, because it's a pretty direct attack, really. It feels like a direct attack.
Most definitely, I think so.
But well, maybe to kind of conclude, I mean, you know, I do think in a general sense, the Land Reg has lost its way a bit. But something I don't understand at all from a sort of strategy point of view, because clearly senior management, you know, set the strategy, set the direction. Fundamentally, I think an organisation has got to get its core function right before it moves into other big resource heavy projects. So with that in mind, I still don't understand why the Land Reg, for example, has moved into you know, the land grab to take the local land charges data from local authorities. I am sure there is a strategic reason. I don't understand what it is. If somebody wants to tell me, I'd be delighted here. But to my mind, my rather simple little mind, get your house in order first. Look at your registration times, a straightforward plot. If somebody buys a plot, you know, a garden plot, it might take a year and a half, give or take, to register it.
Again, it's a strange time, you know, there was always going to be a dip after this, we call it, period of volume transactions, wasn't there? And maybe the timing to work on these kind of projects seems off, doesn't it? Should we say it that way? As you say, you know, we certainly here during that sort of stamp duty holiday period didn't work on any expansive projects that was going to take any resource, because all resource was frontline, getting people exchanged, getting people completed. And to put it so simply, you would have thought that all resource should be utilised to get these delayed, backlog transactions up to date. And that snowball effect should surely then help, you know. They're not going to be chased and so on and so forth as much.
Well, you know, and a bit of maybe a concluding tip for the Land Reg. And I did see a gentleman.
I'm sure it's far more complicated, and we've made that out.
I agree, but at the end of the day, if technical issues are the point. For example, a chappie on, again, the Gazette comments said, well, you know, I'm retired, I've got absolutely acres of experience. You know, I've dealt with unregistered titles for my entire professional career. You know, I offered my services to the Land Registry to sort of, you know, basically help investigate titles, and I was declined because I'm not a civil servant. So there are, and we know for a fact, for example, hey, you know, recruitment tip for the Land Registry here, there's a whole shed load of senior conveyancers who have left the profession in the last 2 years because they just don't want to deal with it anymore. Loads of those are going to have title and registration and unregistered title experience. Why not take them on as consultants to do title checking? You know, there we go. In fact, you and I might go for it, Stu. Well, Stu, you know, I think there was a lot packaged up in that, wasn't there? Yeah. I mean, you know, I think you're right. I think we need to conclude on a positive in the sense that, you know, the Land Registry is fantastic in the sense of what it does. And I think, you know, I think most conveyancers would agree that the staff have, across the years, always been very helpful. But certainly something seems to have gone a bit awry when, as I say, registration of a garden plot can take a year and a half. And I think that's probably the issue. And I think
it's the impact, isn't it? It's the impact that it has on conveyancers. You know, we've still got this kind of period of the last 2 or 3 years now hanging over us because we can't get all those transactions registered, and that can't be right. It's when it, you know, materially affects us, and our complaints are going up because of this that it really kicks in.
Well, it's not been built into your fees. And perhaps perhaps another concluding plea is, why don't the lenders get together with the Land Registry? And why don't the lenders just understand the land registration process and delays and stop sending standardized chasers?
One thing I would say is, I think one thing that has slightly changed is I would actually say the lenders have become a bit more acclimatized to the Land Registry delays, and I don't think they are chasing as much.
Well, that's a good thing to hear.
As a general, you know, they obviously still chasing, blah, blah, blah. But I would say there's a bit more leeway with lenders at the moment. I think, you You know, there is a realization that there are problems, especially on new build transactions. So I actually think that a lot of the lenders are more relaxed and aware of this situation.
But I still think, you know, a firm should really just be able to, you know, if necessary, just sort of, you know, send the snapshot of your application inquiry or whatever, send it to the lender. There's the definitive statement as to how long we think the registration is going to take. And really, from that point, the lender should really butt out. Why continue to, you know, send periodic chases when it's just completely unnecessary? That's what slightly baffles me. But anyway, well, thanks for that, Stu. I think there was more to unpack in there than we thought. Yeah, I think perhaps the Land Reg has lost its way temporarily, but let's hope it gets
and I think if anybody from the Land Registry is listening to this chat, would more than welcome anybody to come onto the show to go through the issues that there are. And it could well be, Dwayne, couldn't it, that, you know, we're not sitting at the Land Registry, we don't see what applications they receive, and maybe they have a point. But of course, if anybody is listening and watching, we'll be more than happy to have them on and have a chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm always happy to be, you know, corrected and proved wrong. But I think what the Land Registry need to see is the perception of the people, of the users of their services. They need to see the impact that, as I say, the users of their services are experiencing the impact of what's going on. So, you know, you can very much speak from the coalface, Stu. But as you say, if someone wants to come on and say, well, actually, Lorraine, you're talking nonsense, you know, I'd welcome the opportunity to talk, as you say. So hopefully we'll perhaps see someone from the Land Reg in the not too distant, Stu. Take care now.
Take care. See you soon.
Bye.